a tragedy took place in Las Vegas the other day where a police officer was shot in the back of the head. Really good news is that, he went from in grave danger, in very serious critical condition, to now stable. So hopefully he's going to make it. And then we had another officer involved shooting around the same time, which is really strange, in front of our federal courthouse. I don't appreciate it that there are people out there that would blame Steve Sisolak, our governor, for it, but I do think he made the right decision by now calling in the National Guard. Well, the man joining us on the line right now, he is a talk show host, KFI Radio in L.A., and he was also in the National Guard during the Rodney King riots in 1992, so he can give us some good perspective on this. That is Bryan Suits. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Hey, what's up, Bryan?
Hey, good to talk to you again.
Yeah, appreciate it. You're the perfect person to talk to about this. Before we get to what's happening today in America, what do you remember about your time in the National Guard in 92 during the Rodney King riots? That had to be a pretty wild and crazy time for you.
And you know what? I have to add something. I started in radio in 1992 at K-Rock FM. I was called up for the riots. I started in talk radio in 1999 in Seattle, and just in time for the WTO riots. So I actually have had to leave the studio and be in the Guard twice
Wow.
in two different civil unrest situations. 92 was crazy because it happened on live TV in one particular place. I knew we were going to get called out immediately. There was a lot of people were running around just saying, "Where's the manual? We haven't done this." And I had just, gotten back a year before from Desert Storm, and I was still sort of in war mode. And there was a lot of young guys who never ever thought they'd see anything like this on an American street. And and it was really, really ugly. It motivated me to want to leave Los Angeles. And I thought, well, I'll never see this again in my life. And then 99 happened, and that was just stupid. And it's a different deal. But I'll tell you, I was young, and it was stressful for me because I was in a part of Los Angeles that I wouldn't normally hang out in. And I saw that area tear itself apart. So the difference now is the social media aspect and the fact that this has become a nationwide thing. I kind of have to ask myself, without the Chinese bat soup fever and the built up, 2.5 months of isolation, would this have this momentum? It really feels like a bungee cord, was pulled to its limit.
Can I just ask you? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to ask.
Go ahead.
Do you know what the flavor is of because I've never had Chinese bat soup myself. I'm just curious.
Tastes like bat scrotum, which I guess defeats the
sounds
purpose
great.
if you've never had.
All right, I'm sorry. I just had to ask you. That sounds delicious. Our producer, Jason Stein, can't wait to pick up some of that soup and eat it up. Anyway, I'm sorry, Bryan. Go ahead.
He makes a great homemade one, too. So I
bet he does.
He should bring it in.
I just vomited in my mouth. Okay, go ahead, Bryan. I'm sorry.
I like to throw a little matzo ball in there. You know what I mean, Bryan?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bryan. Go ahead.
But that's the thing is I really think that part of the dynamic is a built-up tension with people, on top of the fact that for the first time, the initiating event for Rodney King was a verdict. It wasn't 2 days after he was beaten on video. It was an actual verdict is what kicked that off. This, I think finally a lot of white people are looking at unambiguous police brutality, that if it was your son, your daughter, or whatever, just unambiguous police brutality, that it really doesn't require a lot of debate. It does require that maddening, legal process that is ensconced in our Constitution and all that. But there's a lot of people that see that and just
Sure.
are upset, and so that's and also we're
No
all
question.
on social
Yep.
media. So go ahead.
Oh, that's a huge thing. No question. Again, if you're just joining us, Bryan Suits, KFI Radio, was in the National Guard 92, Rodney King riots. Okay, so Bryan, give me a little bit of information on this, and thank you for your service, by the way. I always want to say that to you every time you join us because we all appreciate it. I want to ask you, what information can you give us? What exactly does the National Guard do when they're brought in? And obviously it's to defend and to protect. I get that. They bring their tanks. But can you give us specifics? What exactly does the National Guard do when they're called into a situation like this?
Well, if they brought their tanks, they're not reading the orders correctly. So they didn't bring any tanks. There's no tanks.
Okay.
Bradley fighting vehicles and tanks are not on the streets. You're seeing Humvees and occasionally the up-armored wheeled vehicle, we'll call an MRAP, MRAP if you're nasty. And so their role, the initial role, is to back up local law enforcement, and that means law enforcement does the heavy lifting. They do the riot sticks to the crowd and clear the block, and the National Guard secures it and stands there and looks awesome. The next tier, if it gets to and if people don't know this, there have been insurrections in America throughout our history, and generally it's governors. They don't have to wait for the president. Governors can call out their territorial militia or now National Guard. If it gets to the next level, if authority starts getting shot at, then the National Guard can go to the next level and shoot back and take that lead role. I haven't seen that anywhere yet, but that's their basic role, is the local law enforcement, whether it's Louisville, Los Angeles, Las Vegas. Law enforcement says, well, stay behind us and look awesome. And like what they did at the LA City Hall 2 days ago was there was a front line of LAPD, and then there was a back line on the steps of National Guard. And one of the psychological effects, and this is definitely tripled since 9/11, is that the average American has deep respect for the military uniform and the American flag. So even if you have contempt for your local police, if you see somebody who is an accountant or a teacher or a baker or whatever, or a radio talk show host, suddenly in a military uniform, then it's really, really psychological difficult to spit at that guy or woman, or to disrespect them. You've seen some viral videos of a-holes in Minneapolis doing that. I've only seen one, actually, but so that's the other effect. Is the psychological effect of, wow, look at that. There's military force. They've got riot sticks, and oh my God, they attached a bayonet, which I don't get. It's like I'm already carrying an M4 carbine. But now I put an ancient medieval weapon on the end of it, and now you're intimidated? Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, Brian, I saw a video yesterday, actually some pictures of West Hollywood. And I know that Santa Monica was just decimated, and a lot of those, Fairfax was really destroyed by a lot of looters and rioters. But in West Hollywood, it looked like there was actually an Army division out there, or was that the National Guard? It looked to me like it was an actual Army division in West Hollywood last night.
There was a lot of guard, and they were there to just stand there and prevent people from taking over intersections and things like that. And what happened also in Hollywood was a California Guard unit came down from Central California, from Sacramento, Lodi, and those wonderful spots, and came down into L.A., and some protesters, Jordan Peele, the director, the guy who did Get Out and all that stuff, he was there shooting video, and a woman asked these National Guard guys to march with them, and they said, well, we can't. We're holding this intersection. And then she said, well, would you take a knee with us? And they took a knee, and it was a very powerful moment. And so what police are doing, like in West Hollywood, L.A. Sheriff's Department, that's their jurisdiction. In Hollywood, it's LAPD. And they're just plopping the guard down an intersection, saying, form a line, hold the intersection. And so when they're in formation, it looks like, a division is literally 18,000 people, but when you get a company of 120 soldiers or 140 soldiers in 3 platoons or 4 platoons, it's supposed to look intimidating. It does look intimidating because it's not something you see on American streets. It's what, if you were in Iraqi, you would say, what is this, Wednesday?
There's been a lot of conversation, especially on the internet, from specific members of specific political factions that say that this is the start of a dictatorship. But I look at what happened in New York City in the Bronx, and just how there were thousands of businesses overrun, thousands of stores just destroyed. I saw a couple of cops get run over. There were a lot of people that were just attacking police officers, and police officers, in many cases, they really couldn't defend themselves. I look at what happened there, and I think to myself, the only way for this to stop is if you have a National Guard presence. And 2 days ago, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, refused. He had 13,000 ready to go, but he refused to bring them in, and then he blamed Bill de Blasio for that. Were you surprised by that interaction, and do you think that was necessary?
I was this morning. This morning he throws NYPD under the metaphorical bus after some of them were thrown under cars, and then again some of them NYPD ran into some protesters. But for him to throw the world's tallest communist, Mayor de Blasio, and his NYPD under the bus. That was really lame. He could have had New York National Guard, on the streets and preventing looting, and he didn't do it. It was really, really lame. It's funny to see how here in California, where some of the most deep blue mayors with the deepest blue governor exist, and they were already in love with their public health law, which is pretty robust. If you look back at 1918, I mean, they can order all these things closed, and they were in love with their decrees. Now, all of a sudden, they're resistant to restore order, because emergency, like in 1992, emergency law, literally the Insurrection Act of 1807 is what George Bush invoked, on day 2 of the riots. And that is how you bring the federal military onto American streets, because our Constitution says that the federal military will not enforce civilian law. It's the Posse Comitatus Act, unless there's a declaration of insurrection. And so if you have these little skinny Antifa punks running around screaming Black Lives Matter as they throw a brick at a cop, and it's organized, then you can rationally say, well, okay, it's time for the Insurrection Act. But it's funny to see how they will not invoke their authority to restore order, and their inability to separate the word protester from rioter, because it's all about your actions. You can protest all day long, but suddenly at 7 p.m., if you decide you want a 4K TV, you're now a looter or a rioter. And so this is where our mayor, Karen Garcetti, he just won't drop the hammer. Gavin Newsom knows that the buck stops with him. Sisolak knows it stops in Carson City. I used to be in the Nevada Guard, by the way. I was in 2-to-1 armor in Fallon, Hua, Scouts Out. And, the governors know that until that declaration of insurrection is made, it is on them to restore that order. They don't have to wait for the president. And by the way, the president used to have to wait for the governors to ask for it. As of 2007, the president can wave his hand, and he can make all the Nevada Army National Guard active duty. They work for the Pentagon. They don't work for Sisolak anymore. And that's where every governor needs to know that you better restore order, or you will have federal troops overnight.
All right, so speaking of the president, Brian, I want to ask you a little bit about what took place the other day. A lot of people are calling it a photo op in front of a church while holding the Bible for about 10 seconds, and I think that's very accurate because we all saw it with our own eyes. Now we have a U.S. military advisor resigning after that photo op, saying, "I wish you the best," and then saying how appalled he was about how we had a peaceful protest during the day in Washington, and then all of a sudden a couple blocks are cleared out and rubber bullets, gas, you name it, at many of these protesters, and the president doesn't even reach out to this church. They didn't even know he was going to show up. They denounced what he did because, listen, I'm not a religious person, but I think many would agree with me, many even Republicans would agree with me and Trump supporters, that that's exactly what this was. It was a photo op. So as someone who was in the National Guard, who served honorably as you did, Brian, does it offend you, the antics of the other day, and what Donald Trump did as far as the Bible and the photo op, and now you have a U.S. military advisor resigning because of it?
Well, he didn't just wave it. He didn't just hold it. He did wave it. I'd like to point that out. The thing that annoys me the most, because I'm a chess game. I'm a 4-level Star Trek chess game long-term guy.
Oh, wow.
Is that the optics of these were not the DC police. These were federal police with better gear and way sexier kit, suddenly bum rushing that crowd with rubber bullets, the whole thing. Plus, that crowd had international media embedded in the middle of it.
Right.
Allied nations like this Australian crew from ABC, Australian Broadcasting. The cameraman was just repeatedly beaten by a cop with his shield. That stuff is the lead story on China Central TV in Beijing. 1.3 billion people. The United States loses all of its standing to point a finger about Hong Kong. So now the Chinese can say, whatever. Look at this.
Right.
We're not shooting rubber bullets yet. But I was pretty disgusted by it, because clearly what happened in the Oval Office was, hey, I should walk over there and do a photo op because it was vandalized the night before. And that gets translated down to the federal police as, hey, get this crowd out of here immediately right now, have them disperse. That was, for people who don't know, you're right. That was not a L.A. looting protest. That was people standing there chanting.
Exactly. You make such a good point, and I'm glad to hear you say that, because let's call it for what it is, right? You call yourself a conservative, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay, and I appreciate your intellectual honesty.
That's what the tattoo says, anyway.
That's funny. No, but sir, in all seriousness, you're not the only one. I mean, there are conservatives, to their credit, out there that have called out the president for what he did the other day, and I appreciate all of you for doing that. But my question to you is, what would you say to a Bill Barr? What would you say to a guy like that who actually scoped out those blocks that morning? Reports are now coming out. And those who defend that type of action. It's okay if you support the president, but I don't, in my person, it's not okay if you're not able to do, Brian, what you were just able to do. What would you say to a guy like Bill Barr?
I would say, have you seen what's been going on in Hong Kong? Are you correctly offended and disgusted by it? Then why would you authorize it and instruct police to get in that position and America to look like that in the middle of this? Did you know it would wind up like that? And if he says, gosh, I didn't know, then you don't know about the power that you wield. When the attorney general says, POTUS is going to that church, to the federal employees who are in the riot gear, all they hear is clear this out, clear out Lafayette Square right now and use your shield.
Oh, I don't blame them. Yeah, I don't blame them at all.
It puts them in a terrible position. Suddenly,
and actually, Brian, an hour ago, Mark Esper went on and had a conversation and said that there were no rubber bullets and there was no tear gas.
No, that's not true. I saw it with my own eyes. We saw the video.
That's what Mark Esper just said about an hour ago.
Okay, so let's go with that, Brian. I saw the video. You saw the video. Reporters on the ground said that they were gassed. In the video, you can see some of the officers shooting rubber bullets. How could somebody like Esper do a press conference? And I haven't seen it, by the way. I'm going by what JD said, and I believe him. What would you say to a guy like Esper who says something like that when we saw it with our own eyes? I
didn't see the presser. Was he talking about the federal police or guard units? I don't know what he was referring to. I do know that he's in a position where he had to publicly come out and specifically mention the Minneapolis incident from a week and 2 days ago, because he has, 25% of the active duty U.S. military are African American, and he knows damn well that. And then, the majority of the U.S. military looks at that and says, "Yeah, I know murder. That's murder. I know killing in battle, and I know that that's not it, and that's not police work either." And so he had to do that. But I don't know why he commented on that, because I looked at that video too. I'm seeing plastic bullets being fired correctly at the ground.
Absolutely.
In front. You don't fire them directly at people. They're not actually made of rubber.
Right.
But I don't know why he would comment about that. There's too much countermanding evidence.
He was talking about the National Guard, I guess, and he said he didn't know that was going to happen. He said he was going to be visiting with some troops. That was his impression. And so this whole thing came as a surprise to him, Brian.
Well, here's what I think. Here's what I think,
minute.
Brian.
Are you saying Donald Trump are you saying Donald Trump is unpredictable?
Yeah, I think that's what Stein is saying a little bit. Here's what I'll say, and then I know JD has another.
I'm totally okay with that.
I know JD has another question. I just want to give my opinion real quickly on why I think Trump did that, and then we can move on from that subject. I think the reason why Donald Trump did that is because he is a narcissist. I think the reason why Donald Trump did that because he think it would be a show of strength. I think it was a show of weakness. Trump didn't do anything. All he did was hold up a Bible. That's not leadership to me. I think he did it for himself. I don't think he did it for anybody else. I don't think he was trying to be symbolic. And I think if he actually cared about that church burning down, and he actually truly
didn't burn down, it was caught on fire.
Okay, if I could just continue, I think if he actually reached out to those members of the church and actually walked inside and met with some of those leaders, then to me anyway, that would have meant something. He didn't do that. He stood in front of the church for 20 seconds. As you said, he did wave the Bible for a few seconds. He held it up, and then he had all the white members of his staff up there taking a picture during a time of crisis. That's my opinion, Brian. Let me get your thoughts on that, and then I know JD has another question for you.
Yeah, he did sort of that phony tough guy face, let me walk in front and the whole thing. And then, by the way, he did hold the Bible upside down, so there's that.
He did.
Oh, of course he did.
No, it was. So now you're saying he's an unpredictable narcissist. I continue to be shocked,
Brian, but here's the deal: had he gone up and had he gone to the church and tried to read off a scripture, Brian would be calling him fake, and so would the rest of the mainstream media. So it was a lose-lose situation for him there, because obviously he isn't exactly a religious guy, and he's made a lot of mistakes in his life. So I think for Trump, and I look at it as more of a a showing of strength for his evangelical base, which I think at that point he had to do, considering the fact that St. John's, every single president in the last X amount of years has been at St. John's. It's right across from the White House. People who are religious, they factor that into when they make their decision in November. So I think that he had to make that move. But as far as the tear gas and rubber bullets, I'm not sure if that actually took place.
Brian, do you agree with that? Do you think this is something that Trump had to do?
Yeah, I think he had to. I think it was a cynical, calculated move he had to do. And I mean, as I looked several times in the video, he looked terrified to me. He looked like someone who's terrified, who's putting on a face so that they don't look terrified. And it fails because in the end they wind up looking terrified.
Fair enough. All right. Well, listen, Brian, you're the best, my man. I appreciate your honesty, and I love your perspective on all these subjects. And again, I want to say this is very important. Not only are you a great radio talk show host out there in L.A., but you're also one of our heroes and a former member of the National Guard. And I appreciate your service to this country, and I'm a big fan of yours. And keep up the great work, my friend, and look forward to having you on the show very soon again. Stay safe, my friend, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
All right. Anytime, guys.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brian.
I love that guy. Bryan Suits is awesome, by the way. And if you want to know where Brian is, as I mentioned, he's a talk show host in L.A., and if you're a talk show host in L.A. on KFI radio, you got to be doing something right in your career. So very intelligent.
Suits served in the military and was in combat over like a 20-year period. I mean, he was in Desert Storm in 91. He was in Kosovo in the mid-'90s. And then he was back in Iraq during the George W. Bush years. So the man has served in combat. He's actually injured. He's a Purple Heart recipient as well.
Yeah, a hero. That's why I called him a hero. I got to call it exactly what he is. He's a hero. And you know what else I appreciate about him? I appreciate this about anybody, is that when you're a Trump supporter, which I would assume he is, which it's fine.
I actually don't think he is.
If you're a Trump supporter or a conservative, as he is, and you're able to call out the president for some of his disgusting actions and his behavior, it's what I call intellectual honesty. Doesn't mean we always have to agree on everything. But I think everybody should agree on this. This was a photo op, and it was inappropriate the way it was handled and the way it was done. And I don't understand the people around him that could allow him to make himself look like a fool once again in front of this church.